Welcome to this small video of Hello World on Springboot. The idea here is to basically introduce how quickly we can start writing a Springboot application and also understand the very basics of how easy it is to actually do it. Right, so here I am on the start.spring.io, the URL, which helps us create Springboot applications instantaneously. Right? And when I hit this particular URL, I see this page where I have to make a few selections, right? So there are a few package management, frameworks like Gradle for Groovy. There's something called Gradle for Kotlin, and there's the old and the very popular one called Maven, right? So for the purpose of this particular video, we will just stick to Maven, right? And our language of preference is going to be Java, right? And we will talk a lot about these during the course of our training. So don't worry if you don't understand any of these at this point, right? The idea, like I said, here is to just introduce you to some of these, terminologies and to basically see how easy it is to get started. Right, so just to give a name to this particular microservice or a Spring Boot application, I'll just call it training demo if that's okay for the purpose of this particular video, right? And the packaging for most of the microservices, in fact, I can probably say that all of these microservices will be jar, right? The monolithic world, which we used to work on previously, we used to have war files that were deployed onto VMs, right? But with cloud native applications, we have basically a tendency to basically just go for a jar file, right? And we will choose Java 17, which is probably the latest long-term support version available for Java at this point, right? And in terms, what you see on the right is basically a list of dependencies that we know we would need to add basically to our microservice, and that would allow us to fulfill the business requirement, right? So for the purpose of this particular video, we'll just add one library called the Spring Web, right? This basically allows you to expose REST endpoints, which you can then share with other teams who are going to basically consume your REST endpoint, right? So with all of these selected, I will just quickly click on generate button. And as you can see, the zip file has now been downloaded onto my laptop, right? Which means I can quickly go and unzip it, right? I'll say show in Finder and I'll unzip it, right? And then I will go to an editor, right? Any editor of your choice, which is like IntelliJ IDEA for that matter. And I will try to open this particular application in IntelliJ IDEA. So I'm just going to import that training demo project. So I just click on open, I go to downloads, and here it is, the training demo project. I'll just open it in the new window, right? So now that project is imported in IntelliJ, which is the editor that I'm using, right? As you can see, there is a POM file. So this is basically nothing but the Maven file, which is used to manage all your dependencies or the libraries that your microservice is going to be using. As you can see, this is the only library that we had added as part of when we were selecting the libraries on the start.spring.io. And this was the only library which is the Spring Boot Starter Web. So we had selected Spring Web. Basically, the name of the library is Spring Boot Starter Web. And this allows us to not just bootstrap the application, but also expose REST endpoints, right? And along with this, we'll keep adding more and more libraries as we go. There's also this test library because you will be writing test cases. We will try to do as much of a test-driven development as we can on this particular training. Right, so this comes for free. You do not even have to add it when you are selecting the libraries on star.spring.io, right? I think for now, this information should be enough. Let's move to the SRC folder, and you'll see both main and test folders. Test, as the name implies, will have all the test cases that we will write in this particular project, right? And if I just expand Maven, you will see both Java and resources folder, right? So resources folder is where we will, as the name mentions, we will have all our resources which the project or the microservices might need. For example, any configuration that needs to go into this particular application, we will have those configurations in this application properties file, and we'll add more and more properties file per environments as we go along, right? If there are any templates to refer to, or if there is anything else like some files, some images that we want to refer back in our code, all of that static stuff will actually come and sit under the resources folder, right? And the Java is where the actual code is going to be written, right? All our Java files, whether they are controller layer files, whether they are service layer, whether they are repository layers, and we'll talk about each of these layers in a moment. All of these files will come as packages, inside this Java folder, right? So as you can see, this as at this point, this is the only class that exists, and this is the starting class for a Spring Boot application, right? When you start a Spring Boot application, it will come and look for a file which basically has the public static and void and main function in it. So, and it has the Spring Boot annotation as well, and we'll talk about annotations in a different video. But to be able to just start this and see, I just have to click this button over here at the top right corner, and this is how we can easily start a Spring Boot application. And it's up and running in my local laptop right now, right? And just to take this example a little bit further, as we spoke, right, we would want to actually create a endpoint, a REST endpoint, which can be exposed and shared with a different team if we have to, right? I'll just go and create a new class called training controller, right? And I'll just create this class called training controller, and I will just put a annotation called REST controller. So basically, we are trying to tell Spring Boot that this particular class will have a few REST annotations, which will basically tell Spring Boot that this has some REST endpoints which need to be exposed, right? And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add another annotation. And like I said, don't worry about these things if you don't know at this point. They will get understood in future videos. The idea here is just to give you a feel of what it is to basically write a REST endpoint in a Spring Boot application, right? So I just added another annotation called get mapping, which basically tells Spring Boot that this is a get endpoint, right? And there are different HTTP methods available for us to create REST endpoints. And we'll talk about the HTTP method as well. But for now, get endpoint is something that does not expect anything as an input and just has a URL. You can just call the URL and it gives back a response, right? So just to define the functionality of this endpoint, the first Hello World API that we are trying to create, right? And I'll just call this function as hello. It has a string return type, so we want to return a static response as well, right? So I will just say return hello world, right? And this is as simple as that. We've just created the very first REST endpoint. It's static. It doesn't serve any business purpose for that matter, but it still is a REST endpoint, right? So I'll just restart this service so that it recompiles and takes the changes that we've just added, right? And you see it started very fast. And now I will go to the browser. So the application has started again, and I just wanted to also highlight that you would see that this is a pattern that we are following here. We are calling the URL as /v1/hello. Right? I could have just written hello. V1 is basically versioning of the API, and we'll talk a little bit about the versioning in later videos as well. This is one of the ways we can version the APIs, because the APIs will continuously evolve, and there will be time when we might have to support multiple versions of an API as well, right? So just to a very small introduction to API versions. We are calling it v1/hello, right? Uh, so now that being said, we'll go quickly to the browser, right? And we will type HTTP colon double slash localhost 8080 because that's where by default the microservice Spring Boot application will start the microservice on. It will be on 8080, right? And then I'll just put v1/hello. I think it's already there. I'll just quickly select this, and as you can see, hello world shows up as a response. Right, so there you go. We have created our very first Spring Boot application, and we have exposed a get endpoint that returns a response on placing a request onto the service. Right. So I hope this was helpful. It was a good start. We will continue to build upon our concepts on how we can add more and more business functionality, and also how we can continue to learn more about the different APIs, how they can be written easily, and how they can be exposed to the outside world.